Tonight,
This is a national emergency.
Detonators charged.
a covert government project on screen this summer in the blockbuster Oppenheimer.
Why would we go to the middle of nowhere?
Why? Why? How about because this is the most important thing to ever happen in the history of the world?
But that wasn't the whole story.
What happened here on that day, on July 16, 1945?
That huge expanse of land wasn't empty after all.
There were families living as close as 12 miles to the test. My brother died of stomach cancer. My mom died of bone cancer.
I had thyroid cancer.
One of my sisters is surviving brain tumors, and the other one is surviving thyroid cancer.
We always say we don't ask if we're going to get cancer, we ask when it's going to be our turn.
These families saying their disease is no coincidence, and they're looking for what they call justice.
We were the first people exposed to radiation any place in the world as a result of an atomic bomb, and we're left out.
This special edition of Nightline, Oppenheimer, the true story. We'll be right back. Thanks for joining us. Tonight, the families who say they're the real-life fallout of the famed Manhattan Project, fighting for what they describe as long overdue justice. Decades after the nuclear tests, they believe miscalculations may have left hundreds of thousands of New Mexicans exposed to deadly levels of radiation. Maria Elena Salinas has their stories.
So someone who has never been to New Mexico, well, how would you describe it?
Blue skies. Like how I wrote a song and it says, the sky is so big it wraps you up in blue. And that's what I feel sometimes. We used to drink out of the streams and the mountains and all that stuff, and never ever got sick. There was nothing that could poison you or kill you except maybe rattlesnakes and radioactivity.
Carrizozo, New Mexico is about an hour away from any grocery store.
That's sandia, that's a hot one.
So once a week, a group called the Farmers of Rio Arriba and Rio Abajo drops off fresh produce donated by local farmers to food pantries and senior centers in the area. In each bag of food, a flyer from the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium, a group that's working to spread the word about health risks from the country's nuclear program in New Mexico. Paul Pino's been working with them for 6 years.
Food, you know, is life, and it helps spread the word and it helps gather people. It's kind of like bait to give them the information. And I didn't really put the pieces together until about like 6 years ago when I saw a presentation by the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium. And then in like 2 hours, it all just came, the truth just came like crashing into my life. My brother died of stomach cancer. My mom died of bone cancer. One of my sisters is surviving brain tumors, and the other one is surviving thyroid cancer. They're all four that were alive at that time were affected. And during those 2 hours of that presentation, I thought, everything just fit together all of a sudden, you know.
Pino's family was one of many that lived near Carrizozo, a bustling railway hub in the early 1900s and just 35 miles from the first atomic bomb test in 1945.
His dad witnessed the atomic bomb, the blast,
Really?
right here on this street now.
What did he tell you about what he saw?
It just turned into daylight.
We didn't know what was going on. Then he went home and went to bed.
And did any members of your family get cancer after that?
Oh, yeah.
Almost all of
We
them.
had four of us that had
Kidney cancer, including me.
Including
And
you.
it's a family of 11.
What time did you start?
Locals describe New Mexico's role in the atomic program as a cradle-to-grave process. The cradle? Hundreds of uranium mines and mills scattered across the state. After that, the production and testing of nuclear weapons in Los Alamos. And then locals say the grave. Low-level nuclear waste is still stored here in underground facilities.
Thank you. Gracias.
Cancer is the second leading cause of death in the United States, and although radiation exposure is a known risk, it may be impossible to know how much radiation exposure in this community influenced a person's chances of getting cancer.
Some farmers from the Rio Grande brought green chili and onions and beans and information about downwinders. Please help spread the word. What's your name?
On July 16, 1945, the U.S. government detonated the first atomic bomb in what was called the Trinity test.
This is a national emergency.
The culmination of 3 years of Manhattan Project research dramatized this summer in the blockbuster movie Oppenheimer.
Why would we go to the middle of nowhere for who knows how long?
Why? Why? How about because this is the most important thing to ever happen in the history of the world?
Christopher Nolan's film introduced millions of viewers to the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer and the scientists he recruited for the project.
They weren't naive scientists who just didn't think about what they were bringing into the world. They felt they had no choice.
The film shows the team of scientists living and working for years in the New Mexico desert. At the Los Alamos National Laboratory, around 200 miles from the Trinity test site, which is here, in the middle of what's now the 2.2 million acre White Sands Missile Range.
The one thing we have plenty of is space, and you'll even notice if you listen, you don't hear anything.
Right.
Not even commercial airliners flying over.
They're not allowed to fly over.
They're not. We have controlled airspace, surface to infinity. This was part of the Alamogordo bombing range. By the time that they were looking to do the Trinity test, this area was under military control and use.
How much did the Los Alamos team know about the risk of radiation before the Trinity test?
Not very much.
The Los Alamos scientists knew radiation could do serious damage to the human body, but didn't know it could cause cancer. So did they do any testing before Trinity to see how far the fallout would travel?
On May 5th, they had a very large test called the 100-ton test.
Right.
It had a little more than 100 tons of high explosives, and they put a radioactive source in the middle of it. They believed both that test and the Trinity test would have a fireball that would just rapidly rise to the stratosphere and disperse harmlessly around the Earth. They were very surprised to find out it did not do that. When you're close to the Earth, you pull a lot of dirt up into the fireball, and the fireball doesn't rise as rapidly or as high.
Despite the surprising results of the experiment, the Trinity test kept moving ahead as planned.
From there to July 16th, the Monday where they conducted the test, they did more and more detailed calculations trying to understand what they weren't getting right. Ending the night before, they thought there would be substantial fallout. They made extensive preparations to evacuate most of New Mexico, and they thought as long as the number didn't go above 750 millisieverts, people would be okay. We know differently today.
Under normal circumstances, we are exposed to about 6 millisieverts of radiation per year on average.
So you had a 100-foot tall tower right here with the gadget up at the top. They had to call it the gadget because they didn't want to refer to it as a bomb in case somebody was listening in.
And inside that huge ball was the plutonium. And that is what caused so much destruction.
The gadget's core was made of 13 pounds of plutonium, of which only 3 pounds combusted. The other 10 pounds dispersed into the atmosphere.
About an hour after the test, the plume began to drift to the northeast off the White Sand Missile Range.
Manhattan Project scientists realized they had dramatically underestimated the amount of radiation. Still, no civilian evacuations happened. Days later, they found a family living on a ranch nearby. Scientists estimated they'd been exposed to 2,000 millisieverts of external radiation, as much as the most highly exposed person would be in Hiroshima or Nagasaki. They still weren't told.
Why didn't they warn people that lived nearby?
Per their measurements, it was safe. And the other reason why is because this was one of the most secret projects that the U.S. had ever done.
After the Trinity test, they had a cover story. They repeatedly have said Trinity was a test conducted on unoccupied government lands. But Trinity was also an accident. It greatly exceeded Chernobyl, Fukushima, 3 Mile Island. It was the first nuclear accident in history and the worst nuclear accident in history.
After the break, the human cost of the bomb and how the people of New Mexico are fighting back.
Imagine our shock when we found out that there had been this fund set up. We were the first people exposed to radiation any place in the world as a result of an atomic bomb. And we're left out. I always tell people this isn't normal cancer histories. This isn't normal health histories. It's not.
Tina Cordova's family lived in Tularosa, around 40 miles from where the atomic bomb was detonated in 1945. Her father was 4 years old.
My dad started with a cancer at the base of his tongue. He didn't smoke, didn't drink, didn't use chewing tobacco, had no viruses. My dad was fastidious about himself. He got a cancer very similar to the one that Robert Oppenheimer had, but my dad didn't chain smoke and never drank a martini.
You yourself have been battling cancer.
I had thyroid cancer. The really horrific thing in my family is we always say we don't ask, if we're going to get cancer, we ask when it's going to be our turn.
In 2005, Cordova helped co-found the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium.
What is the goal of the consortium?
About 2 years into our work, we found out about the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act.
The government has listed 19 different cancers that can be associated with high-dose exposure to radiation or radiogenic. Since 1990, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, or RECA, has been paying out lump sums of money to people who've gotten radiogenic cancer and can tie it to nuclear testing. The bill covers people who worked in uranium mines before 1971, when the U.S. government stopped being the major purchaser of uranium. It also covers residents of so-called downwinder communities in Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. But it doesn't include New Mexico.
Imagine our shock when we found out that there had been this fund set up. We were the first people exposed to radiation any place in the world as a result of an atomic bomb. And we're left out.
Is that the obstacle, money?
That's the obstacle that they place in front of us, money. They counted on us to be uneducated, unsophisticated, and unable to stand up for ourselves. But we're not those people anymore. We know what we know. The fund has paid out $2.5 billion over 33 years. Our government spent trillions of dollars developing and testing nuclear devices in the American West. And now they want to count pennies?
For the last few years, the group has been collecting health surveys from people in the area.
We lived 18 miles from where the nuclear test was. My father, my mother both died of cancer. All our cows, their backs turned white.
Census data shows that around 500,000 people lived within a 150-mile radius of the Trinity test site. It's impossible to know just how many of them were affected. Up in the mountains above Tularosa is the Mescalero Apache Reservation. That's where Waddell Canseo grew up.
There are other Mescalero Apache tribal members that have had cancer that is unexplainable. But I think partly because of the culture, the mores of the tribe, it's not looked into like it should be.
Beloved language preservationist dies.
There were 3 distinct dialects of Apache, and my father was working at trying to preserve those dialects.
When your father passed away from cancer, did you have any idea where it came from?
No.
But then your mother did also.
It was devastating. My dad was my idol. He was very quiet, very soft-spoken man, but he would stand his ground. He would mean business, and I firmly believed he was going to walk out.
Both your parents were children during the time of the Trinity test.
Yes, I think everything that was happening during that time was blown in this direction: Alamogordo, Tularosa, and then up towards Mescalero. I was in the U.S. Army, and I loved every minute of it. And I've tried to have faith in our government, anything that they do. But it is disheartening when you learn of something like this.
What makes us different from the Nevada test site downwinders? We're primarily Hispanic and Native American, and they are not.
Bernice Gutierrez has been working with Tina Cordova and the consortium for years. She says she believes they were left out initially because of environmental racism.
The Nevada test site downwinders were given compensation based on assumption. It was assumed that they were exposed, and that's why they got compensation. They've asked us to prove it, that how do we know it was true? But there's no way on God's earth that we can explain all the cancers we've had any other way.
Without government assistance, residents like Gutierrez have been left to do the digging. You've done a lot of research on infant mortality during that time. What have you found?
I got online and I checked every death certificate for every county that existed in 1945 in New Mexico. Many, many, many babies died. And a lot of the deaths could be related to the atmosphere, the radiation exposure, marasmus, enteritis, colitis, congenital deformities. Those are things that could very easily be related.
The 1945 uptick in deaths shows up clearly on this 1965 CDC report on infant mortality. But with current information, it's impossible to clearly link it to radiation exposure. Gutierrez herself was among those potentially exposed babies.
I was 8 days old.
8 days old?
8 days old. There was no reason to suspect that the government was lying to us. They said it was an ammunition dump explosion, and that's what came out in the newspaper. But it wasn't until later, when my family started getting cancer, that I started wondering about that.
Altogether, 41 members of her family across 5 generations have gotten the disease.
The government never came back to our knowledge and did any water testing or soil testing, nothing. And now people on their own are coming and doing these things and finding out 78 years later what should have been done then.
This summer, though, it seemed like the downwinders were finally gaining some momentum. In July 2023, the Senate passed an expansion of RICA as an amendment to the defense spending bill, which would cover New Mexico's downwinders. But it still hasn't been proposed in the House. So this fall, Gutierrez, along with Cordova and other members of the consortium, traveled to Washington, D.C. to advocate for themselves.
So I'm not an elected official, but the people of New Mexico have joined with me and sent me here to be a voice for them. It will deliver $150,000 in one-time payment of restitution. We've lived in such stark poverty for so long dealing with this issue.
Right.
And so for us, we'll never be made whole. This can never be remedied.
You can't replace your loved ones.
You can't replace your loved ones. I've been doing this work for 18 years. Do you know how many times I've been up and then down? But I'm telling you right now, there's no doubt in my mind. I've invested this much time. There's no going back. And all of us feel that way. I will do this work until the day we find success or until the day they put me in the ground.
What would justice look like for you?
We just need for them to finally give us our due. You know, Martin Luther King once said, justice delayed is justice denied. And I feel that that's what has been done to us. It's been denied.